I'm Scott Hanselm, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Anthony Eden, the creator and founder of DNSimple. Is it DNSimple or DNSimple?
It is DNSimple, although I've heard people say it in all kinds of ways, and I'm happy to have them as customers regardless of how they say the name.
I feel like when you started it, the first thing you would have done would have been to register not just DNSimple, but also DNSimple with the extra S, and then redirect it to canonicalize your own URL.
Yeah, we would have loved to have registered it from day one, but in fact, somebody else already owned it. So we went through the process years later to actually buy DNSimple.com from somebody who sold it to us.
That is actually kind of awesome. It's always DNS. It's always DNS.
Always.
So you've been on the web since the early mid-90s. You've been a web person since the web began. And DNS is fundamentally at the root of everything. We joke about how it's always DNS, but it always is. And back in the day, in the early 90s, I think when I registered Hanselman.com, it was hard. You'd call network solutions and you'd have to fax people and talk to a human to get a domain name. How did you get into the business? How did you think 14, 15 years ago that DNS was something that needed to be solved and that DNSimple could do it?
It was pure chance. At the time, it was 98, so late 1998. I was living in France, kind of failing at the work that I was doing, trying to build a CMS system for a school over there. And it wasn't really working out, and decided to head back to the US. Got back to the US and was looking for work, and I received basically a job offer from somebody who was looking for a Java programmer. But in order to take the job, I had to be able to help him become accredited. This was back in '99. This was when the .com domain was basically deregulated. And so he said, I need your help. We have 5 days to do this. And I said, no problem. We can do this. I had to do the technical implementation. So in 5 days, I built a Swing application where I could run Python scripts written in Jython to control the communications and run through the test with VeriSign, because it was Network Solutions / VeriSign already at that point, I believe. And it was completely ridiculous. It was such an overblown solution, but we managed to actually get accredited in that very short timeline. And he's like, this is awesome. You need to stay and work for me. Come be the CTO. And this was at a company called Signature Domains. And we were one of the first 7 domain registrars during the deregulation in 1999.
Wow. So you ended up being the lead dev and the CTO. If you look at your LinkedIn, you've got a bunch of other things on it that are you stepping out of the DNS business and then back in? Or are all of these different holding companies because there was Atreon LLC and different organizations. So the timeline is not clear.
That's correct. So I did the domain thing for quite a while in 2000. I can't remember exactly when. I think so. We went through the bubble and the burst of the .com bubble and burst. I then joined another company to work on health systems, so medical device systems. Then came back to the domain space. Then I left that again. Went and worked in a different part of the domain space. So ended up going over to Hawaii, and I ran the Mariana Pacific Islands top level domain for a few years. So the registry and registrar for that, which is .mp. So I did that for a little while. Then I went and worked for a DoD contracting company, and I worked for Yahoo for a little bit. And then, so I was all over the place. And then I started doing my own consultancy, and that's what Atreon was. It was just me writing software and charging people for it. Worked for Living Social during the Living Social heydays as part of the crew there, writing Ruby, writing Clojure, doing all kinds of fun things there, all the while running DNSimple. So I actually had the full-time job in the beginning working for Living Social while I was running DNSimple. And then when DNSimple finally grew enough where it could sustain me, then I left that job and started working on DNSimple full-time. And that was about, I'd say 2012, 2013.
Okay, so check this out. This will be a funny way to transition. I'm looking at an email from my wife in June of 2011, and she has a screenshot of our credit card. And she says, there are 23 draws, meaning debits, from these guys. 18 for $8.50 and 5 for $8. Who is DNSimple?
That just shows you how long you were. I launched DNSimple in July of 2010 after having worked on it for 3 months. So the first line of code was written April 1st, 2010, and it was launched mid to late July 2010. And you were already on it and getting billed repeatedly by 2011. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that means that I was probably, I don't know, not single digit customers, but definitely the first couple of hundred people, I was right there, because it was simple.
Yes.
And this is not I don't do sponsored shows. It's not a sponsored show, but I've known you now, as a fan of yours on the internet for 15 years. I had tried to use, I think we were all anti GoDaddy at the point.
We were.
Like there were just a lot of really crap places to keep your domains. And it was incredibly tedious to simply add a record. And as we started moving towards the cloud years later, you want to add a text record, you want to add a URL redirector. Everyone was complicated except DNSimple. And that's why I was like, oh, I'm in. And I remember like the moving everything over and the collaborating and the consolidating. And I'm looking at my account now and I have like 41 registered domains and 47 zones. I got down from 50 because keep in mind that every domain that I've registered with you is a startup idea that I failed to ship. So there's also that. You are a living monument to my own failure as a startup founder.
Well, I'm also a living monument to my own failure as well for other types of startups because I've got, I think, 150 domains in my account.
Any one of them at any point could be a thing.
It could be huge. I've got, and then of course you have variants of that one name because just having the .com isn't enough. So yeah, it's kind of funny. People collect domains and it's the graveyard of ideas. Right? Like that is totally what happens to many of us, especially creative types, software developers or designers or entrepreneurial types. It's just, you build up this portfolio of domains, which funny enough is the reason that the very first business that I worked for, that I stopped working for him because he left the registrar business because he had a domain portfolio of like 30,000 domains. And he instead focused on his domain portfolio rather than running a registrar.
Oh my goodness. I wonder, I've got a bunch of, I have a bunch of vanity domains that are like redirects to stuff. Like I have a YouTube channel called Computer Stuff They Didn't Teach You. And people would keep telling me that I didn't really register it there. And it turns out I have Computer Stuff They Didn't Teach You with 2 T's, didn't and teach. And I also have the misspelling one with the single T.
Right.
I wonder sometimes if people over-index on the misspellings and they think that it's going to be important to have every single variant. I wonder if like Microsoft has 20 different versions of.
Oh, undoubtedly.
Just in case somebody types it wrong.
Undoubtedly. I'd be surprised if Microsoft didn't own Microsoft where the O's were zeros.
Oh yeah, and there's the whole.
And then the UTM code, the UTM versions of it.
Turkish eyes, Cyrillic. Every possible version. There's someone in charge of that. That seems like a big problem with DNS in general.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, it's the DNS system was designed in a gentler time when people weren't so worried about other people doing bad things other than as jokes, right? I mean, we're talking about a protocol that was developed in the 80s and the internet the web still was just a gleam in someone's eye, right? That wasn't even going to be a thing yet. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, he probably did. He may have been thinking about it then, but I'm not even sure. And it has withstood the test of time, but not without the pains along the way, and not just from the types of attacks we're talking about, where they have letter variations, but also the operational side of it. DNS has long been a vector of DDoS attack because everybody has to have it. It's a protocol that has to be underlying pretty much everything. So it's one of those protocols that gets attacked pretty regularly in all kinds of different fun ways.
I was thinking about Microsoft, who I work for Microsoft in my day job. So for disclosure, recently is starting to change all of their cloud stuff to .Microsoft. They have .Microsoft as a TLD, which is crazy, a top level domain. And they are saying that that's more secure. So like whatever .cloud.Microsoft or cloud.Microsoft. Why is that the case? Why do they believe that? Why is .com not fine for everyone? Why do we need a .ninja and a .microsoft?
Well, I think .microsoft, for the obvious brand reasons, is quite interesting. But I think from the security perspective, they believe that they can run the name and control the registry. And essentially, for them, that means there's one less point that somebody can attack that is out of their control, because they can't control the .com namespace. If somebody were to find a vector to attack it, or any other one, .net, whatever it might be, they would be down just like everybody else. But at least in the case of .microsoft, they have more control over it. So that's probably why they're saying it's more secure. They also might be able to put rules in place starting at that top level domain requirements. For example, and they did this, I think it was .app. So Google did this with .app and .dev. They basically turned on the HTTP, I think it's HSTS or
HSTS.
Yeah, they turned that on by default and required everything to have secure connections. So that's an example of when owning the TLD gives you the ability to implement things you couldn't otherwise.
Yeah, HSTS, HTTP strict transport security. It's like a redirect before, like once it's happened once, they don't even redirect you. At the client level, you can't HTTP your way anywhere anymore. That is a secure place from now on. It's a huge hassle when you're doing local host development and you get redirected over to an HSTS. Yeah, so they've switched that to .microsoft. You all have .com, .orgs. I have some .ios and some .cos.
Yep.
I'm looking here at my 50 domains and I'm thinking about, could I lose them? Could they be attacked? You know how people can steal your SIM cards? We hear about people swapping a phone number out from underneath someone. When I register with you or with someone else, how do I know that that's going to be mine and that it can't be stolen? Because like Hanselman.com is my whole family, all my cousins and everyone's email going back 20 years.
Yeah. So let's think about the ways, SIM swapping, funny you should bring that up, is one of the attack vectors for getting around two-factor auth with SMS. There's a reason why we don't offer two-factor auth with SMS. Why we offer instead with hardware keys or with the one-time passwords, right? Because we're trying to make it so, one, we give you the tools to protect yourself. And that's the starting point. The other thing is that you have to be with companies that you trust are not going to be socially engineered. Social engineering is probably the number one way that a lot of these takeover attacks occur. Granted, there are other unique and fun ways, which we've seen recently that come out. But truthfully, if I'm going on a one-off, if somebody were to attack one-off and they wanted your domain particularly, most likely they try to social engineer their way into it to try to prove they're you. And so I think that being with companies that have pretty strict policies against taking action on your behalf is a good starting point for ensuring that your stuff remains safe. It's also just paying attention to it, making sure that it's being renewed, ideally automatically, every year. And potentially, if it really matters, renewing it for multiple years, right? That's something that you could do as well. So there's a lot of ways to protect it. It really comes down to, one, personal security, and two, trust in the security of the entity that you're buying and managing your domains through.
When you created this, there are still a number of like small boutique DNS companies that are well known. What makes those boutique entities that are not, Google domains or GoDaddy, like competitive? For DNSimple, it was like you had an API, you had a very thoughtful UI, like it was really easy for it. I felt like it was a developer's.
It
DNS
was, yes,
service.
You got it. That's exactly what it was for. And I think that for some of the other ones, price is going to be something that's competitive. Look, a lot of people still undervalue the importance of their domains. You'll see it time and time again. They'll go through a shady registrar or a company that's not really innovating at all. The domain then gets lost because they can't even access it. The person who manages it goes away. And they're with a company where one person had access because that service didn't offer the ability for multiple people to have access. That's pretty common. And so I think people get attracted by low prices or things like that, or legacy. They're just like, I've always bought my domain through this company. I will continue buying it through this company, right? So legacy has a big part of it as well. I kind of think you have to keep evolving and keep looking and seeing who out there is actually continuing to make progress on the protection and the operations of domains and DNS. And a lot of the small ones won't. They're pretty happy where they're at. And that's okay. They're going to move really slowly. The big ones will initially, but then they have a lot of different business models, right? So one of the things we tried to do is get in that sweet spot right there in the middle where we could continue innovating, but at the same time, we weren't spreading out and trying to do lots of different things and thus running out of resources to stay focused on domains and DNS, which any company so DNSimple has always been funded by bootstrapping. So we've never taken outside funds. And a company like that has the opportunity to do what we've done, which is stay the course and focus on one thing and do that one thing well. Whereas if you're VC funded, you grow or you become, you go to public trading, like the expectation is you will continue to grow, and you can only do that by adding on more products. And so that's where we see sort of that separation.
Yeah, if I look at some, and I won't say their names, but if I look some obvious cheaper domain type places, now it's hosting and email and work marketing tools and security, and it's like they don't do just DNS. And but at the same time, you make the point that people are kind of devaluing DNS, and they're like, I just want to park this thing for $1.
Yeah,
and they don't.
Yes.
Right? They just hold on to this for me, and I'll give you $1. And that kind of devalues what's going on behind the scenes. If you look at the blog.dnsimple.com, your team is very technical, and they're always following the way that the industry is moving, for whether it be null MX records or whatever, that are making DNS more secure and more safe. I hate to see people in this race towards the cost bottom.
The word that we hear is it's a commodity. That's how they think of it. They see DNS as a commodity, which is interesting. It's not been helped by the big players commoditizing it. That's fine, but that's fair. We can play that game too. We just have to figure out a way to stay lean so that we can play that game at the same time and yet continue innovating and doing things that. But again, if we stay focused, we can do that. It's through focus that we're able to innovate, and it's not necessarily by being the biggest or the fastest growing company. It's more about being the most focused company.
Hey friends, in the interest of me learning more about AI and helping you learn more about AI, for the next couple of episodes, we're going to have Leendert van Doorn from Qualcomm help me understand AI. What is an NPU and why is it important today?
So the NPU stands for Neural Processing Units, and it's basically your AI accelerator. And so it can execute AI operations, these large language models, or all sorts of different generative AI models, in a much more efficient way than a CPU or a GPU can. So just to give you an example with Microsoft's Recall, right? You run that continuously in the background. Running it on an NPU takes about 30 minutes of overall battery lifetime. If you were to run it on a GPU, it would take 6.5 hours. Right. So it's all about energy efficiency, very specifically dedicated to a single task, which is AI in this case.
Very cool. So I'm going to go learn more about NPUs and how they can do things more cheaply from a battery perspective, more efficiently, and why I might want a Snapdragon processor in my next PC.
Exactly. Thank you.
And folks can check out more at qualcomm.com/developer to download those things and learn more today. Now, you've got this thing called the domain control plane, and maybe I'm conflating these things and you can explain it to me. But when I go to the dashboard, it says 41 registered domains, but then next to it, it says 47 DNS zones. Does that mean that I don't have all of my domains with you, or am I conflating those two things?
It might be that you have a domain registered somewhere else and pointing at us. It might be that you have a name in there that's not even registered and never was. It's possible. The domain control plane, the idea behind it really was that we'd love it if everybody used DNSimple all the time, but that's not a reality. The reality is some people are going to mix DNSimple with Route 53 or Azure DNS or different providers, maybe even on-premise DNS like Core DNS. And so what we did with the domain control plane was build a way to connect into those other systems. So from within DNSimple, I can connect to Azure's DNS, And I can actually manage in a bidirectional fashion zones that are at Azure or at DNSimple side by side. And I can move them back and forth. And so that the idea was an acceptance that a multi-platform world is the reality. Like we're in a multi-cloud world. That is the way it works. And we'd rather adopt a system or create a system that allows us to work in that space rather than trying to force people because we're too small to force people to do anything. That's the reality of it, right?
I see.
So let's just make it so that it's easy. And our goal is always to make DNS and domain management easier. So if somebody can do all that through the UI or the API at DNSimple and they have that single interface, that's pretty powerful, we think. So this is kind of this is early. It's still nascent. We created it within the last year and a half, and we've been testing it out. But it still has a long way to go, I think. But that's the principle behind it.
Now, you've got a really great website called howdns.works.
Yes.
So I would encourage folks to check that out. I think that it is one of the little gems of the internet that people should spend some time on. It's the little website that could, howdns.works. But in the interest of maybe understanding a little bit more about DNS, I think that the average developer gets the idea that they go to a registrar and they register a domain. And then their home network, they maybe put in 1.1.1.1 or 8.8.8.8. And they've got these, very simple IPv4s that they've memorized. Can you explain the relationship between me putting in 1.1.1 or whatever and what you're doing and how Google or Cloudflare and my own network interact and when they eventually show up at DNSimple and how that interaction works?
Sure. So we do the authoritative DNS side of it. So that is, we hold the zone information for a domain that's with us. And ultimately, the answer to the questions lies with us. But those questions first go through a series of other servers. The 1.1.1 or 8.8.8, and there are several of these that have been run over the years, are resolving networks. So they're resolvers. The resolvers are essentially the first place that you go to ask the question closer to you, because the idea is if we cache a bunch of these requests closer to you, then you don't have to go back every time to the authoritative name server to ask that same question. There's also an onboard cache on pretty much every computer that is also queried, but the time that it will hold that response is shorter and shorter as the closer it gets to you. So the farther away it gets to you, the longer it might hold that response in memory. So the idea is that you make a request, and howdns.works is a great way to see all this in the comic version of it. But you make a request, that goes to the resolver, say an 8.8.8.8 or 1.1.1.1. That resolver in turn starts trying to figure out, where is this domain? Does it have something in cache that it can start the answer? So, and if it doesn't, it would have to go say, first, let's pull this apart. I'm going to go to the root name servers. And it's like, do you have, say, scotthanselman.com? And the root name server says, no, but I can tell you who has .com. So then that gets delegated to the .com name servers, which are run by a whole bunch of companies. Then the resolver says, hey, .com name servers, do you have scotthanselman.com? And it says, no, but I can tell you who does have scotthanselman.com. Then it might go to our name servers. And our name servers finally say, yes, we do. And it responds back. The resolver then caches that information that it's gathered along the way, returns it to you. And then you ask again, and it's like, here, I already know. Don't need to go again. So that's one of the performance enhancements that makes DNS continue to scale even as the internet just grows and grows and grows, and we have more and more traffic.
Mm-hmm. Now, this might sound like I'm a fanboy, but certainly I've been a customer for a very, very long time. So if I am indirectly a fanboy. But in the early days, 10, 15 years ago, one of the reasons that I stuck with DNSimple was I would constantly have to make a CNAME or a subdomain change or add a text record. And I would watch people like live coding on Twitch or live coding on YouTube try to put a website up live on stage. And they would update a CNAME in GoDaddy or something. And then they go, well, we're going to wait about 12 to 15 minutes for the DNS to propagate. And the demo would never work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for some reason on DNSimple, I would go and make, example app.hanselman.com, and I'd hit refresh. Or even now when I do a Let's Encrypt certificate and I add a text record and then I go back to Let's Encrypt at the command line and it says, oh, I see it. Is that some herbs and spices that you're doing? Because you always seem to be fast on picking that stuff up while I'm constantly waiting for for other domain providers to I don't know, clear the caches, do whatever they need to do.
Yeah, that's part of what's, I think, what works well at DNSimple and what makes that piece work really well is that we, instead of using the protocols that you have in the DNS space to synchronize between different servers, we use our own internal system. And that internal system has been built up over the years to be pretty fast. And essentially the goal is, how fast can we get changes to our edge? Because our network's not just one server or one set of servers in one location. Our authoritative network, right now we have 8 points of presence around the world. So we have to get that data out to all of them. The furthest one, which is kind of our bar that we set for, has to go to Australia. And it has to go from our primary data center in the US over to Australia. So we've worked hard to make that caching mechanism really fast, like that transfer mechanism, work really fast. And I think one of the things that we also did is that we took a lot of time to measure that and constantly measure it and make sure that it was continuing to work. There were times where it worked up to a point, and you know how it is with scaling, right? You start scaling something, it works to a point, and then it kind of just starts to slow down and bog down, and it doesn't work as well. You need to do some redesigns. We've gone through several of those over the years to redesign our infrastructure and our architecture for how we move data around. So yeah, that's part of what we do. I think it's also our willingness to set default TTL values that are fairly low. A lot of original, like if you go to, let's say you go to your registrar, they might default you to a TTL of a day, right? And we talked about those caching name servers, the TTL is the time to live. So if that caching name server has that and it has a very long time to live, it's not going to clear itself. It's going to let that thing run down, and you're going to get that old record if you're doing an update. So yeah, there's a few little things that we did that we set up, and then there's a few big things that we did over the years to make it work fast, and all that work together to make it so you can do that type of thing, and you can know that the record's going to be deployed real fast.
Yeah. As a customer who is constantly tweaking, making changes, adding text records, messing around, particularly in development, I can attest to the fact that I don't like that thing where I make a change to my code, I push it into Git, I wait for my CI/CD. Those are all very fast. All of this happens fast. And then I go to my DNS and I update a record and I sit around. I don't have that experience with DNSimple. And I've always appreciated it because when I said at the beginning it was a developer's DNS, that feels like that. I've constantly seen people with other domain registrars wait and fight and hit refresh and ipconfig/flush and reboot just anything they could do to get whatever's stuck unstuck. Which brings me to my next question. I, as a web developer, feel like when you think about the 7 layers of networks, I understand HTTP. I used to, true story, I used to telnet to port 80 and simulate HTTP gets to show people how you can browse the web at port 80 as a way of showing students in my university classes when I was a professor how to drive stick shift. I can't do that at the DNS level, but I bet you probably could do a Wireshark and DNS at that level. You know what I mean? Like the way I know HTTP, DNS.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I also used to telnet to port 80 on HTTP servers to show how it worked.
Just that kind of nerd.
The good old days. I also have written 3 DNS servers. I wrote one in Perl, I wrote one in Java, and I wrote one in Erlang, which is what we currently operate. So wrote the core of what our name server infrastructure run on. Granted, other developers have added their energy to it as well. But I spent a lot of time trying to understand the protocol really deeply. And that's the cool thing about it. To me, it's always been fascinating because the protocol itself is massive, but it's broken up in all these little chunks because it's evolved over time. So you can pick a piece out of that and read an RFC, which is out there in the public, it's for everybody, and you can understand how that little bit of the protocol works. Granted, there are some pieces of the protocol that are not so easy to understand, but the fundamental protocol is just so elegant and beautiful. I think again it's a testament to why it has survived for so long, is that it is so elegant at its core. And so I've always been fascinated by it. I've done a lot of talks over the years on UDP and for DNS and even things specifically about how Erlang is really good at taking packets and breaking them apart into their little bits. It's because it has a particular part of the language, which are called bit strings, which are perfect for mapping DNS packets. It's like they were made to go together, the peanut butter and jelly. So yeah, I love it. And I've spent a lot of time doing that and a lot of time writing tools that query DNS and try to understand what's going on. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun. I'm a nerd at heart. Even though I run the company now, I still love, I wish I could be writing code more often is what it comes down to. Alas, there are more important things for me to do.
I think, I'm not sure if WhatsApp still runs on Erlang, but early on they were on Erlang, and it seems to be a great back-end language and environment for doing stuff as fast as possible at scale, chopping bits up and getting them out, boom, 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 boom.
I mean, it was designed for telephone switches, right? So it was designed to work in an environment that needed to be reliable, but also could break. So the whole principle behind it is like allow it to fail fast and then recover well. And that's actually part of what DNSimple's infrastructure is designed as well, rather than trying for this, this massive redundancy. Granted, we have plenty of redundancy, but if a system fails, it's designed to go down hard and then come back up well and clean. And Erlang as a language, and more specifically OTP as a framework, was designed to do that. And because of where it was running, because it was running in telephone switches, and you didn't have the opportunity to go out there and like try to go fix something. It needed to come down and then restart clean.
Yeah. That term Erlang was a unit of telecommunications traffic. So it makes sense that it would be great at doing something like DNS. And then Erlang/OTP. What does the OTP stand for? Do you know?
So I always thought it was Open Telecom Protocol, or something like that. But somebody told me the other day that I was just flat out wrong. And now I'm going to have to go look up on my own again.
Because they say it's Open Telecom Platform, but
yes, somebody said the other day that wasn't the case. So now I'm wondering if I've been bamboozled or if there is a deeper story here.
I think it's one of those things like, where it meant something once and now it's become bigger than it is. And now Erlang is certainly not just for telecom systems, although it's ironic that it's doing both DNS in this case and then WhatsApp as well. It's perfect for that kind of work.
Yeah, it is really neat. So I've written in lots of different languages. I've written in everything from Java to Python to Ruby to Perl to PHP to like just all over the board. Go, Rust, Clojure. My favorite language still is Erlang because it's not like anything else. It's pattern matching in the language itself is so beautiful. It's just, and granted, it's based on Prolog. So I'd have never written a line of Prolog in my life, but I probably should go back and check because I bet that Prolog is just as beautiful for certain things.
So let me ask you this last question. And I mean it as 100% of a compliment, although some people might not think about it that way. But I've always thought of DNSimple as the best kind of boutique tech company. You've been running it now for 15 plus years. You've been thinking about this stuff for 20 years, but I've never seen you try to get acquired or become bigger than necessary. A boutique is like we make high quality, bespoke leather goods out of a nice little place in Florida, and you come and visit us, and you'll meet like some little old tailor. You're the old tailor in this case. You're the guy with the measuring tape around his neck who wants to go and measure your inseam and make sure you get the perfect bespoke suit. Is that the future? Is that the plan, or is there some get bought by giant billionaire company and then you go off to an island somewhere?
For the foreseeable future, I'm totally happy to keep running DNSimple as it is. I like running it as a boutique service. I like knowing the people that use our service. I really, truly like meeting customers. I go out and I will meet a person, and that person says, I use DNSimple and it makes me happy. And that is a joy for me. Is there a price? Sure, there's always a price, right? But I'm in no hurry. I consider myself a young man. I'm still under 50 here. I've got a lot of years ahead of me.
As I am now 50, you have just paid me an incredibly old man.
Ouch!
So
sorry, not incredibly old. You're just towing over the line. No, I love what I do, and I'd be happy to keep doing this for quite a long time. As long as we can continue to make our customers happy, do things that are innovative, and continue to operate it the way we want to operate it. I am totally happy continuing to do this. I love this business. It's so fascinating. And look, it's got 40 years of history. And so that gives you a lot of room to play in and a lot of space to learn in. And to me, that's a fun thing.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Again, not a sponsored show, just talking to my buddy, Anthony, but I do recommend personally, and I have for years, you can find my tweets going back 15 years, DNSimple, whether it be one domain or 100,000 domains. Also fantastic SSL certificate management now, makes it super, super easy to not have to think about your domains. Thanks for chatting with me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Scott. I appreciate it as well.
We've been talking with Anthony Eden, founder of DNSimple, and this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.